we'll get started. Jeff Denny had to leave, and so since I was the first one to walk in the room, he asked me if I would stand up here and introduce the speaker tonight. It's Dr. Ed Croom. I'm not going to say a lot because you have a very good description of what he's been involved in the handout. I'll say that there are, also add that there are books for sale afterwards. $35 a piece. I got mine, and I've got my signature. Got his signature in there, rather. And so his presentation is on Faulkner's postage stamp, and he's allowed me to add my little 2 cents, which is what it was. I was lucky enough to be at the Faulkner conference where this stamp was unveiled. Eudora Welty was there at the time. And the irony of this, of course, Dr. Croom is going to mention what's really behind it, but the irony of it was one of the first jobs that Faulkner had was working at the Oxford Post Office, and he detested it. Because he said he didn't want to be at the beck and call of any expletive that had 2 cents for a stamp to tell him what to do. But at any rate, with that, I'll turn the program over to Dr. Croom.
Great, thank you.
All right, so my name is Ed Croom. I live in Oxford. I moved, first came to Oxford in 1982. I'm an ethnobotanist, that's why I put that up there. A lot of times people in the traditional definition would say ethnobotanist did what I did in my graduate work. I would live with rural people who still use plants for medicine, sometimes for food, sometimes to wash their hands. And I lived with them and documented their plants by collecting them. But to me, I now use ethnobotany in the broader sense, which goes with this theme of people and plants. And whether we call it economic botany or ethnobotany, it has that relationship of how we're relating to plants. So in 2003, I got more serious because I had moved to New Jersey, came back tired of the winters and not seeing even dirt until May, and snow so black on the side of the road from soot that it was just not very interesting for many months of the year, though the spring and summer were lovely. So at that time, I bought a house 2 or 3 blocks from William Faulkner's Rowan Oak and could go there on a regular basis. At that time, I was working not for the university, but as an independent consultant. I worked for industry. I worked doing things that would involve regulatory, travel. I would be going to Australia, to China, to Europe. So the first of these pictures in 2003, this was literally the place that I went to have a peaceful walk on a cultivated grounds. And I generally went because I've done photography at this point for 50 years on a regular basis. And so it was my place to walk. Nobody is at Rowan Oak within 1 hour of sunrise like I was. Sometimes within 2 hours, which sometimes I stayed 2 hours, a person would come with their dog. But they generally go in the afternoon. So quite honestly, it was my private sanctuary that I didn't have to pay to mow the grass. I didn't have to do anything but go there with my tripod. Every picture I'll show you was taken with a tripod. It helps you technically, but it was also part of this kind of contemplative way I wanted to start my day. I would take a deep breath out at the edge of the place before walking in. Then I would set up the tripod, makes you stop and look and be careful what you're looking at. And then I would again practice a couple of deep breaths to look before I took any picture. Faulkner was very well known as a great writer of place. Matter of fact, Eudora Welty talks about it was just to her the best writer of place. But living in Oxford, I can tell you that most people come that are from out of town and they walk down the path and they go to see the typewriter, or they've heard he wrote part of a story on the wall. And as a botanist and a person who said, I have a historic literary landscape here, I have tremendous resources of really what is a homestead and a woods right in the middle of Oxford that otherwise would have been full of condominiums, is exactly what the land use would have been. So Faulkner, in his love of privacy, has really created a preserve within the heart of Oxford. So my first picture, this is from December 21st of this last Christmas. Why do I show this picture? It is a great start to me of saying welcome to Rowan Oak. The book that I have here was published in 2016. I photographed starting in 2003 on a regular basis when I was there. This was from this last December 21st. I remember it because we don't always have a great fog in the morning, but when it is, it's special. And so I'm inviting you to come here in my world through, this is my grandson, who's 3 years old. And notice that to me, the beauty is we have this historic house from the time before even the Civil War. We have that mist of time, and I'm inviting you along on my journey. Oh yeah, use this clicker. So what about Faulkner? What did he say? He said it was the land itself which owned them, and not just from planting to its harvest, but in perpetuity. When Faulkner lived in his house, he only had window screens. He never had a television. He loved Car 54, Where Are You? But he would go to a neighbor's to watch that. He had big fights. His wife tried to intervene when his daughter, Jill, was a teenager to say even about playing music there. He wanted to hear the sounds of nature. That's the way he was. So many people come to see the typewriter in his office. Truly, Faulkner didn't have much money until really in the mid-50s is when he expanded and made this office. Other times he could be writing upstairs or in the study that he had in a front room. And so I show this, and I show a few at the first because people like to say, well, what kind of camera did you use? Well, these are all digital. Well, they were all started when digital was evolving. So I keep changing the camera. The biggest thing I say on a camera is it's only good once you have a real relationship with it. When you're first learning it and you don't know what it can do and what it can't do, it won't matter. Because some of the pictures I like the best were some of these early ones. This is a small hand kind of held camera. This is not a big DSLR. And so you walk up this drive. Imagine this drive was there from long before Faulkner was there. The only people that have owned this land is first Chickasaw Indians owned the land. And then Shegog owned the place. He was the one that built the house we'll see. And then the Baileys owned it, and then Faulkner bought it in 1930. Without Faulkner, we both wouldn't have the land and we wouldn't have the interest in the land. But he's our entrance into this land and this site. And here's the house that was, the gutter guard has as 1848, but that was just, the story goes, just some salesman came through. We don't know exactly when the house was built, somewhere late 1840s, early 1850s. But notice it has these wonderful eastern red cedar trees and a wonderful brickyard built by Shegog. The first light in the cedars, well, I showed this, and we'll tell a little bit of a quote from him in just a second too, is that to me, these cedars could easily be in any northern conifer forest in the morning. But people were always saying, where did you see this site? Where did he write this from? And truly, he did have places in mind. But my point is, what people had ignored is the place he actually lived. So here's what he did in Flags of the Dust. Now, he didn't buy it. Remember, I told you 1930. But what I'm also going to tell you is he grew up in his childhood even stealing apples from the apple tree when Miss Bailey lived there. So they knew this place very well. The meaning of peace, they turned into an intersecting street, narrow but more shady and even quieter, with a golden Arcadian drowse, and drove through a gate. The cinder-packed drive rose in a grave curve between the cedars, just like that scene I just showed you. The cedars had been set out by an English architect of the 40s who had built the house, with minor concession of a veranda and the funereal light Tudor which young Victoria had sanctioned, and beneath and among them, even on the brightest days, lay a resinous, exhilarating gloom. Mockingbirds loved them, and catbirds and thrushes demurely mellifluous in the late afternoon, but the grass beneath them was sparse and not at all, and there was no insect save fireflies in the dusk. You could see every bit of that here in this place where he lived, just as these cedars are. And then, what about the other plants there? It was a summer wisteria. The twilight was full of it. From a little after 2 o'clock until after sundown, the long, still, hot, weary, dead September afternoon, they sat in what Miss Coldfield still called the office. There was a wisteria vine blooming for the second time that summer on a wooden trellis before one window, into which sparrows came now and then in random gusts, making dry, vivid, dusty sound before going away. And then in another page, what vow, what promise, what rapt, biting fire has the lilac rain of this wisteria, this heavy rose's dissolution crowned? And so here is the wisteria. And in the background, the white flowers are a species of spirea. Notice again, this was 2004. It was one of my favorite pictures, and it was a very, not an elaborate camera at all. And this is the wisteria blooms. And the second time they bloom, I know to be sure, if I hadn't gone there, to look for the second bloom. The second bloom is when the kudzu blooms. So you can take it either way. If you have a garden, you might see a second wisteria. The kudzu is there under all the leaves. So outside the window was a magnolia tree, but it was not in bloom yet, nor had the honeysuckle mass along the garden fence flowered. But this would be soon, and from here she could overlook the garden, could look down upon Cape Jasmine and syringa and calycanthus, where the moon lay upon their bronze and yet unflowered sleep, and upon other shoots and graftings from the faraway Carolina gardens she had known as a girl. Now I'm going to comment, a lot of local people do call what I'd always call gardenia Cape Jasmine. I recently met someone who said that Cape Jasmine was different than the regular gardenia. They may have had smaller flowers. And syringa is actually the genus of lilac, but he was talking about mock orange. There's no lilac there, but there is mock orange there. And calycanthus is not spelled properly. You have to think of Faulkner as an oral historian. He wrote what he heard, and he famously said, I didn't do a lick of research ever. I just listened to what I was told, and it seems to be true. So here is the honeysuckle growing there that he's mentioned. On the right is the gardenia or Cape Jasmine. This is a close-up of the gardenia or Cape Jasmine. There's the calycanthus or beauty bush. The gardenia, the magnolia, and are several around the place. And to me, just the looks of this kind of old wild vine growing up in the cedars. The cedars are also, you can't see it in this photo yet, not in this photo, but there is a brick circular maze that's in their front part. Again, there's the wild vine. And he says, about this half moon of lawn and without the arc of the drive were bridal wreath and crepe myrtle bushes, old as time and huge as age would make them. About the oak and from the funereal, he loves that word, scimitar of the drive, lawn flowed streetward with good sward broken by random clumps of jonquil and narcissus and gladiolus. So here again is bridal wreath spirea around that drive, another spirea around that drive, another spirea around that drive. And here's the crepe myrtle in the back there, and the narcissus and jonquils. This is a white cemetery iris there along the path, the drive or the path up there to the house. This is Byzantine gladiolus. I didn't recognize it at first because it's just almost dead, and now is dead. It's no longer there. I had no intentions except to go and walk and photograph what's there, but what happened is it turns out by doing it, and as Jack says, to have a date. I had a date, and the beautiful thing about a digital is unless you mess it up, you always have a date, that I know when those flanks were there and what was there then. This was just from this last year's iris, so they're still there. And the flowering quince. This is the unfolding leaves of hickory. Faulkner even taught Boy Scouts what they call woodcraft sort of thing, or woodland camp craft, you know, going out in the woods and knowing what to burn and whatever. So I think he would have noticed things like this, the unfolding leaves of a hickory tree. The dogwood, whether in flower or fruit, the redbud. This is typical of another. Okay, this is the muscadine grape arbor. That no longer is there. And here are the muscadine. The scuppernons are in the back, but the muscadines are lost for eternity. I'm big as a botanist saying that the story goes with the plant line. And they were not preserved, they're not propagated elsewhere in a uniform. And I say this in Oxford as well as telling you here in Starkville, that something needs to be corrected. So here's the fog. Here's the moss. This is from even this year. You can see it's so dense, the shade. And these bricks that are showing are part of this kind of a maze circular. It's surrounded by also cedars, resurrection fern, and the nandina near the window, the sasanquil camellias. The azaleas are placed there with the white and the pink dogwood. Old roses. Faulkner's stepson, a still son, Malcolm Franklin, wrote a book that only about 300 copies were printed. It's called Bitterweed. And he loved his mother and he loved his stepfather. And so he is some of our best record of how they went, even with Professor Brown, who was an archaeologist and was a botanist, and they would transplant from old house sites, even in the 1930s when they bought this, old roses from house sites and transplant them to their house. Wisteria pods, forsythia. I'm showing you this to say a lot of these, they weren't collecting rare and exotic things. They're hardy plants growing there. They were standard things of historic landscapes, right? So he talked about, again, another quote here about the house, the brown unpainted, unobtrusive bungalow is small too, and by bushing crepe myrtle, which we've already seen in syringa and althea, almost hidden safe of that gap through which, from the study window, right, he watches the street. So I want to show you, this is althea, right near Mamicali, or the Tennant House. He built this for the black woman who literally raised him. And so they have the double-flowered and single-flowered, but you notice althea is not a neat shrub, right? It's really kind of hangs everywhere. And so it looks that kind of bunched up, overgrown place if you don't watch it. I love the flowers, of course. And so in the spring, this is spring beauty. This was a pasture. The white flowered back there is a Japanese plum in flower. This is a peach tree. Again, the peach tree is dead. We have no idea what that plant line is. We do know in the South that to grow fruit trees, you have to stay on top of it and you have to treat them well, or they're gone. So this is a stump now. This is the Japanese plum that we saw the flower of. They had a smokehouse that he would sometimes use too. Again, it was like a homestead. I'm showing you the fruits. We also have the privet like everywhere growing up. This was a stable. Again, he only built for the horses in the 50s, this stable, with a beautiful Ed Croom in that pecan tree that top is now gone from a windstorm. In the book, I show you no animals, not even a bumblebee on a flower, but this one I'm loosening up in my old age. So I'm showing you it is, when I'm there in the morning, the deer are so used to me, of course, they're just like, and I never feed them or anything. They're just like, well, you know, I'm just been a squirrel running around or something. They don't pay me any mind. The afternoon sun, this was during the eclipse. So this is one last year. We had a partial eclipse there. I was the only one there during the eclipse, except the alarms went off, and two university police people came up to tell me there were alarms everywhere. I was in the back shooting this. I wasn't even near the house. But I don't think they really trusted me when I said I had been near the house. Winters are, of course, special in Oxford because we don't get them very often of snow. So I'm just going to show several of that we do get snows there. To me, again, these eastern red cedars could be a conifer forest in any snow place, whether Japan or other places, even though the cedar species doesn't grow there. But the look would be the same. This is the smokehouse where they would smoke things with the frost here on the privet hedge. This one I like because sometimes to get the right photographs, it was all overcast. So I had to stand in the snow hoping nobody else would come with their footprints for the sun to come out so I could show you the sun would break through. I think that we all see trees throughout time have been part of myth and lore and majesty. This is one I took last December that was a heavy, dense fog. And it just reminded me of that kind of eerie, ghostly place it can be when you're there by yourself. And sure enough, I had a friend who was with the National Endowment with the Arts who died at 53, 2 weeks after this. So I made a print of this and we all signed it who went to his thing. This is one I took in the last year or so. It's the Osage orange, which just keeps getting knocked around in holes, and it looks like to me almost like it could have been some kind of ancient American Indian kind of look and holding up the world. Tomorrow, I'm going to Oxford. This was chosen as the photograph for the cover of a book called Southern Writers on Writing. So I'll be there tomorrow night when they sign it in Oxford. And so it's something I'm looking forward to because I get to hear the writers' voices. If you've never done a book, and that's the only book I've ever done, the interesting thing to me was you find that generally, having a photography book, I got to have some input in what's on the cover. An author rarely has any input of the image on the cover. It's all done by marketing. But the way this one happened is I was referred by several people to the editor, and I said, if you will let me read the contributions of your contributors, I will pick a photograph I think reflects how they're writing about the South. And so they liked that and it did it. But I'm saying it's rare and I don't know if it'll ever happen again. I like this one because of the cedar tree. It's hard to tell with the lights here, but the cedar tree looks like it's hit by lightning. I don't know what really happened to it. And it had the fire hydrant there. So I just like, you know, fire's a big deal in the woods. I like this just, to me, it looks like a sculptor could have made these cedar trees that way. Faulkner famously at Halloween would tell ghost stories, and this is right on the walkway going up there. And so his cousin Dean Faulkner, who wrote about the ghost of Rowan Oak, talks about how scared she would be running through. Imagine the darkness those cedars create on the path. And imagine you run up through and then you see this right before you to get in the safety of the house. So, and this is just naturally there. This is to me to show how cedars, which you can't always tell exactly when they're dead, and that this, obviously the vines are still already coming. And why do I say that? Because like this shot, this is a cedar that was a post that had barbed wire. That's what all the scarring is. But it looks to me for all the world like a totem. And you can see all of nature and the broken rubble is taking back over. So, you know, once we're out of the way, things will have their own way with it. This, I just had this last year and I liked it. I got out of the car one morning, and a lot of times I do drive. People say, do you walk? You could walk. But I stay there so long and there's no public restroom there that I just photograph, and then finally I say, I'm so old, I got to get home to the restroom. And so, but I got out and the light was here to bring these characters out of this tree that were to me like guardian spirits. I'm going to show you in 1931, within a year, he rarely let people photograph. This is where we don't have any photographs of anything when he lived there. And you can see when he bought it, I mean, it was just falling apart. He got it for $6,000, and he didn't have $6,000. He paid $75 a month, right, till he paid it off. This was taken by Ed Meek, who was in journalism, and he was there showing, here's Faulkner and Andrew Price, who was his caretaker at the time, who would have lived in that house he built for Mammy Kelly. And you can see by that point in Faulkner's life, it was a little not very neat. He was keeping it. He loved his old coat, of course. And so he said, if there be grief, let it be but rain, and this but silver grief. For grieving's sake, if these green woods be dreaming here to wake, within my heart it should rouse again. But I shall sleep, for where is any death? While in these blue hills slumbers overhead, I'm rooted like a tree. Though I be dead, this earth holds me fast, will find me breath. This was when he was writing poetry early on, though it was published in 1933. He did not make his living as a poet, but he liked this poem. That's why I show it. This is the earliest picture I have of me in Bailey's Woods in 1999. This was last December, so I'm going to show you, that was that foggy day. Here's my grandson Julian, and that's what I was taking, his picture. And this is Julian just looking at it, not inviting you, because I find a good picture has the present, which we're there, and the past, which the house shows you in that mist of time, and even the future of the youth there. The curator always let me go. They never kicked me off the grounds, which is amazing. But generally he comes later than me. And the director, what happened is I ended up doing a show. I showed them these pictures and I said, I've been photographing, and after 10 years, I decided that I could show people the place the way I love the place, the way, that's when I left the science world, those of you who are scientists, because the director, when I showed him, he said, on this committee, he said, these are stunning. You have to do a show at the museum. My entire career as a scientist, no one ever used the word stunning for anything I'd ever done. So I said, I've changed worlds. The picture of me taking that was my friend Jason Bolden, who's generally known to be a portrait artist. That's where he makes his money, but he loves to do landscapes. So here he was out painting Rowan Oak himself. He never sells his landscapes or still lifes. Sometimes he donates them to charitable causes. And so I want to just leave you with saying, and to me, Rowan Oak, all the people who visit there, you can make your own story. This is just a few weeks ago. It was a dark, overcast sky, and the light just came through the clouds to light up that And so, to me, everybody sees Faulkner as a writer, but I see he had a very good reason of where he lived, and where he lived is, to me, is its own story. And many people who've been there see it that way. That's the end of the talk, so now we can have questions. Okay? You can smile and laugh. I have a very lovely Sunday school class I love to go to, and we were just talking about how the Old Testament, if you read it, they talk about laughter. But somehow the same word in the New Testament is translated to joy. And sometimes we get more serious about joy. I like laughter.
So, is there a foundation that upkeeps Roanoke, or how does that?
I don't know all the financial details, but I can tell you that the whole landscape is no state funding, and that a lot of that is done by when you go to the house and you pay $5, or they're private donors who pay for literally the mowing of the grass.
So there is some kind of organization.
No, I wouldn't call it that organized, but yeah, there's a route if you decide you want to do it.
Doesn't it belong to the?
Belongs to the university, and the museum is in charge of it.
So the university foundation is where you would get the money.
Yeah, and I'm just saying sometimes that's done project by project. Well, obviously, my interest would be, and Sylvia did work there. And you can, I said, and you did work there to look at the needs of this from a landscape perspective and how it's used. There is, yeah. Sure.
So, as an ethnobotanist, and like a lot of your quotes were taken from his body of literature.
That's right.
In terms of the plants, but did you look into like how he might have used the landscape in his gardens to, how he used the plants in terms of food or medicinal purposes or anything like that?
Right, and I don't know anything about medicinal for it, and thanks for asking that. That sunset showed you a huge pecan tree. So when I say he had a miniature homestead, and that's where he grew up. His family had like one. There are hickories. He grew up gathering hickory nuts from the woods and cooking them. The pecans are there. You saw the fruit trees there, right? He talks about it. He or his family from that walnut. I didn't show that, but there's a walnut there. I'm go ahead and ask it a different way, but he talked about the plants in his writing, and what I did is, if he talked about the plants that I have 130 some pictures in the book. I would tell you about quotes from him, or was it historic ornamental. It basically, he didn't write a lot about medicinal, or he knew the uses of wild plants, but I couldn't find a lot of records of it. I know he did because he was known to teach the Boy Scouts even. Wood lore, that's what they would call that, right, when you go out. What's your interest, or what else can I add?
Well, I think that, I've been there a couple of times, and I think a lot of what you showed in terms of the privets and the nandinas and the rose of Sharon these are ornamental things.
Okay.
And in some cases, with the crepe myrtles and the privet and the nandina, we're in an age of gardening now where a lot of those are not desirable, where we would not maybe want to perpetuate some of these. But in terms of, I was thinking from a perspective of an ethnobotanist,
right,
that obviously the pecans and the walnuts, or particularly the pecans, are we all have pecans and we all gather pecans, and that's a standard. But it would be interesting because I always thought of what he was doing there was maybe for his horses or mules, or he's got a smokehouse, so he's obviously raising maybe some kind of animal, like some pork or something to put in the smokehouse. But if there was something more interesting, like a sorghum or something that he was, I noticed that when you go to Rowan Oak, you're not allowed to go in the kitchen. You can't get to the kitchen. But if he had like rosemary,
The inside
a
kitchen, you
kitchen
can't.
garden or something
Right.
like that in his letters or journals that we might know something about.
All right, let's start out with knowing that most of the things we know about him had to be written by others if it was what he did personally. He totally said, I'm a private person, and anything except my writing, you should know nothing about me. And he really believed in that. And the picture I even showed you in '62 that Ed Meek took, he did that sneaking up. There's another book in the 50s I had. He was sick. I didn't show it on this one. In the mid-50s that Cofield took, who was his main photographer. He knew Faulkner was sick, so he snuck over that morning, and Faulkner got out of his sick bed and said, I know what you're doing. Okay, so my point is, we wouldn't have anything about that. It had to be written like by Malcolm Franklin that I told you about, right? Or his brothers. His brothers might have been even the ones that talked about the hickory and walnut gathering in the woods. He was not exotic. All the ornamentals are things that Still wanted. If you look at his horses, he's on the west side. That's where his pastures, his horses were. On the north side, they don't know exactly where it was, but we have pictures of him when he had a large vegetable garden. And we know later the people who were these caretakers would raise vegetables, sometimes hogs, on share with him. I'm telling you, whether the plants I'm showing you that are just hardy stock, he is not a source of anything I've seen for exotic information. He loved his childhood, and he loved where he grew up, and he bought a place that could be, unlike most of the others then, where he could have this miniature homestead with horses. He also had a cow. I didn't mention this, but it's in the book. He would have a milk cow. That tiny little wooden structure, not the barn in the 50s, not the brick smokehouse, was there from around the time the house was built, is likely. And in that place, he would sometimes, when Jill had a horse, have 2 horses and a milk cow, since you've been there, in that tiny little log structure with a short door. He was pretty short, that he could barely go through. Let me say what I'm trying to do more on ethnobotany. I'm trying to expand it more to say, besides rural and traditional knowledge, to me, we've reached the point I'm interested in, I don't know any other discipline to call it, to say, how are we relating to plants? I don't care whether I'm now photographing people and going to visit their farms that sell at farmers markets. I just want to know how we're relating as people to the plant world and how we use them.
And I don't want to imply that ethnobotany necessarily means food and medicine. I think an appreciation of ornamental plants is an important aspect of human culture. But just one more question, let's see if anybody else wants to follow up.
Okay.
When you read the quote about the cedars and that ended with the only insects are fireflies,
Right.
could we interpret that he had some sort of understanding that these cedars were somehow suppressing mosquitoes, or like
there's a story.
The cedars have some kind of
Their oral
odor that
story. Okay, their
cleans out
oral.
that.
Right. Okay, let me follow. I think I got where you're going on that. There are some people say. Matter of fact, the curator for years would say, "Oh, these eastern red cedars aren't native here." Well, they are native here. Now, I can't prove to you that it wasn't a traveling tree salesman from Tennessee or something that sold the cedars. We don't have enough record that were actually planted there. But they are all native to southeastern U.S. in dry places, right? And they were obviously laid out that way. And the story that went with that is some people said that the cedars were planted, not just at his place, but others, to repel the mosquitoes. And, but think about that. These were planted in the early 1850s. We didn't know what caused malaria or that it was even carried by mosquitoes until about 1900. They couldn't have known that. What they could have observed, of course, is that's on dry land, right? And there's no water, and mosquitoes aren't breeding unless there's some little bit of water around you. They could have, but so I think they're just a long-lasting tree. More, yellow fever was here at that time too, right? Just as deadly as malaria. But there is that story, but I never figured, I don't know how broadly that was held, but people did think that.
It would seem that he thought that, but that's why.
I've heard people say he thought that, but I've never seen him write that. That's all I'm saying. I can't find the proof. Sure.
So, as the landscape ages and presumably some plants are going to meet their demise, do you know what the plan is for replacing plants, or is there some sort of decision making in terms of, do they try to make it like it was when he lived there, or?
I don't know. Sylvia left. Bob, do you know the answer to that? Yeah, I'll let you.
There was a cultural landscape report done back, 12, 14 years ago that assessed that really looked at what should belong there and what the potential of how that property could be managed. And then Sylvia left already, but she followed up with a management plan last year, really looking at what was there, and Ed really invited us to look at what the proposal of the CLR was and how how that could be managed according to what plans were there. So I don't know. It's an interesting place. It is a place open for the public for tourism. I don't think it's a restoration by any means. I think it, like many landscapes today, are interpretations. And so, yeah, I think Faulkner was romanticized, and I think that landscape is to some degree. I think it does harbor the spirit of place, as Ed has so nicely discussed. And I think that's the intent of the landscape, is to keep that sense of place. And I'm not sure if it's fidelity. So much time has changed since even Faulkner was there.
Right.
We don't, and you observe things that were lost and possibly gained.
That's right. That's right. And some, like a still, what we know from Franklin's book, Bitterweeds, is a still would go have peonies. There are no peonies there, not even since I've been there. She would have Lady Banksia rose. She was a southern woman who would have her cut flower and her ornamental garden over there on the other side. It's too shady for most of that. So part of the thing that's going on right now, and part of this by Sylvia doing this, is to say, okay, I got an oak tree here, and it's growing right where the bricks are. Was that really there? So what, do you want two pieces of evidence? What do you decide if you're going to take that oak tree out, right? So it's ongoing. Here's the difference in what I guess I'm pleading for. I did the book this way instead of just doing a flora and a formal thing, and I tried to do a book to say, this is a sense of place, and it's a place worth you considering what happened there and preserving it, and not just walking by it to see the writing on the wall of the typewriter, and it also goes beyond his time. People have, both before him and now after him, I mean, a lot of the people that bought my book, it turns out, well, they got married there, or some of them even in secret. And you know, people have their own memories there, right? I mean, it's been so long since he died in 62. 72 they gave it. So I'm just saying it has its own life, right? Though that's what brings you there. It's not as organized as you might think, is the point. The what?
That was kind of my question. How do you maintain that sense of place and, you know, as time marches on and things change, and so, yeah, so you kind of, it's a complicated question.
No. And I'm just telling you, believe me. All right, here's the difference too, I will tell you. When I go to Eudora Welty's, which is only 4 acres or something, right? And she had members of her family, worked with archives and history. There's been this harmonious thing, and her mother even kept a garden diary, wasn't it? And they got all, versus we got Faulkner, who was just cantankerous, and he didn't want anybody there, and he never wrote about anything he did. He said, "It's none of your business. You only read my writing, and that's it." And I'm not doing it for that, except say I personally, as a botanist, hey, do I have a northwest tropical rainforest temperate rain? No, I don't. Do I? I just said, here's your place, and a lot of people do, where they're walking through the woods or this land to get a sense of that piece of nature and be able to explore it, right? Could be historical landscape plants, it could be the woods. I didn't show you the woods today, I do in the book. But I'm just saying it's still a cantankerous place. Yes.
Two questions. I think one of the plants that known pretty well is from the story Odor of Verbena.
Yes.
Did you come across?
And look, there's not any verbena there, but again, just what I'm telling you, I've seen people debate, the guys, there's been people in New Albany at the Faulkner, they have a Faulkner garden there, right? He was in New Albany, and I've seen them debate what is verbena. So I can't tell you which one it really is.
I think the writing on the wall there outlines a chapter of Light in August, and I wondered if you ever saw, and he got the title, as I've read, from something that his wife said, you know, Bill, don't you think that Light in August is different? Did you ever experience anything?
I have one picture in the book that I made sure I did take photographs every August to show what the light looked like in August. There are different versions of that story, so I'm not sure where the title came from, and he wanted something else at first. But Bob has me pegged exactly right. I'm a botanist. I believe in celebrating plants, whether in cultivation or whether in the wild. And here's a place that's just totally been neglected. Even when I'm telling you, there is no foundation to assure the upkeep of the place. It's totally dependent on how many people tour it or private donors, not for a long-term foundation, unlike Eudora Welty's place, you know. So I'm just trying to do what I can, right, with what I can. I had my camera, and it wasn't part of any job. It's just to say it was there.
Yeah, I was a landscape contractor for several years and did a lot of landscape gardening. And to me, verbena is a low-growing perennial that has no odor at all. So like odor
Right.
of verbena, like I agree. Like he's obviously not talking about the plant I know as
Exactly.
verbena.
Exactly.
Does anybody here have any idea what he means when he's talking about odor of verbena?
The what?
Probably made
I'm
it
thinking
up.
it's
He made
some.
up-
I'm
he
thinking
made
it's
up all kinds of-
Yeah, he did
it's
make up all
probably
kinds of
Gelsemium.
And you don't turn into him to something. Again, he was like an oral historian, and he might call a bird. I've also seen this documented. He might call it one kind of bird, and it was another kind of bird. He didn't care. He was writing fiction, and he was creating for you a fiction world. And he heard all this stuff, right, from family over time and the square and all of that. And he's just. Okay, let me just say, if any of you have any curiosity to read Faulkner and you haven't, here's my simple botanist guide to how I got into it, because I had to do the plants first. if you want to read his great novels, they're all available on an audiobook. And so when you travel, you don't have to see, is it a comma or is it this? You can hear it. The short stories he wrote to make money, and they were much simpler. Okay, he tells you that. I'm only quoting his words. And so the short stories are good. I think he's just brilliant. And I'll tell you, like most people in Oxford, I was scared of him when I moved there. Everybody said, you can't understand him. That's because they're all starting with the most difficult things. And it was English teachers at the Faulkner conference who taught me to say, start this other way and then work your way up. And I found, because I have, family that's 10 to 13 hour drives away, just get you an audio CD and it's pretty easy. So I'm sure we've wrapped up. So thank y'all for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.